Okay. Okay. Hi everybody. Let's get started. Welcome to Branding and Marketing Communications. Well done, everyone, for making it in and not slipping over and breaking your legs. This is Branding and Marketing Communications. Hopefully, you're all in the right room. Yeah. That's the best start. Am I in the right room? That's probably even more important. Hopefully I am. So, I'm Robert Cluley. I know some of you because I'm your personal tutor and I've seen some of you at various events already. If I haven't met you previously, please feel free to come and say hello. I won't remember all of your names because there's way too many of you and many of your names are Chinese and I'm not that great at remembering them, but I will try. But I forget most people's names anyway. You've got my contact details on the slide. My office is B78 in Business North. I've got my email address on the slide. If you've got any questions or concerns or comments about the module, please do feel free to get in touch. Email is really the best way to get in touch with me. Just to set some ground rules from the start, I try to respond to emails the same day. If I haven't responded the same day, please don't email me again saying you've still not responded. I will get round to it. And I don't check my emails at the weekend. So if you email me over the weekend, please wait till Monday and I will respond, I promise. But yeah, anything that you think at all, just feel free to get in touch. If you've got any concerns, do let me know. So what I want to do in today's class is, as I understand it, this is an elective for all of you. Nobody has to take this course. It's not a core module for anybody's degree. So, as I understand that, that means you can all choose to be here or choose not to be here. So I think it's really useful if we just take a bit of time really to explain what's going to happen on the course, what we're going to cover, how we're going to cover it, so that everybody can be really happy with their choice. So what I don't want is in week 10 and 11, people to turn around and say, I really wasn't expecting the course to be like that, and I'm not very happy about it, and I wish I'd chosen international marketing or something different. So I want to go, it'll be a little bit boring, I apologise, but I want to try and go through all the things we're going to do on the course, talk a bit about the assignment, talk a bit about the classes, just so everybody knows what we're doing. So is that okay? Good. So that's what we're going to do first, and like I said, I apologise. It might be a little bit boring. No doubt somebody will look at the slides and realise that I've made a mistake in something, and please feel free to point them out. And then after we've gone through the module, we want to start talking about some of the really key ideas that we're going to cover on the module. Some of the key, what I like to call big questions at the heart of branding and marketing communications practice, theory, and research. We're going to do it in quite a high-level way. For people coming in at the back, there are some slides at the front if you want copies of the slides. So that's what we're going to do today. Does that sound okay to everyone? Oh man, I've lost all your enthusiasm after 2 questions. Okay, so the plan for the class is almost all of the lectures are going to involve me talking for about an hour, then we'll have a short break and a task of some kind, an activity, a discussion, and some kind of presentations from you guys. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. I might go on for a little bit more than an hour because I want to spend a bit of time going through the course. So first thing I want to emphasize is there are some prerequisites for this module. If you're on the MSc Marketing, you will meet those prerequisites already. You don't need to worry about anything. If you're not on the MSc Marketing, you won't have met the prerequisites, or it's highly unlikely you would have met the prerequisites, so you need to come talk to me about it. It's possible, you can still take it even if you haven't met the prerequisites, but I need some assurance that you know what I need you to know. Let me explain a little bit about why that is the case. This module is trying to stretch your understanding, trying to push your knowledge, and trying to develop you to a point where you can become essentially independent researchers in branding and marketing communications. So we're not going to have time on the module to go over some things which are definitely relevant to branding and marketing communications, but aren't really core in trying to push you to become independent researchers. So we're not going to have time to go into details about marketing strategy. So I need you to already know marketing strategy. We're not going to have time to go into detail about consumer behaviour. I need you to already know about consumer behaviour. If you're not confident in those things, there will be an element of catching up that you're going to have to do on the course, because we're going to make some assumptions that if I talk, as I will later on, about Gestalt psychology, that you should cover that in a consumer behaviour course. You should understand something about what that is. Even if you don't know the exact term, you should be able to go look it up online and figure it out for yourself. So that's why we have the prerequisites, because what we're trying to do on this module is push you to stretch your understanding, to stretch your ideas. Some people on the set SEM at the end of the module will say they didn't like that, and that's fine. But some people will, and I think it's actually kind of important on a master's degree, at the end of your master's degree, to feel like you're being stretched and pushed. So that's what we're trying to do on this module. So we're going to go through quite... Don't worry, it's a drill. That is going to happen every week. Why they don't do it at 8 o'clock, I don't understand, but they don't. They do it at 9 o'clock when classes have started. So what was I saying? What was I talking about? I was talking about prerequisites, wasn't I? So, yeah, I know. I was saying the important thing on this module is we're going to go through quite a lot of ideas, quite a lot of material quite quickly. And that can be confusing and it can be difficult. If you're not up for the challenge of that difficulty, this maybe isn't the module for you. I'd rather people at the end of the module say, I really enjoyed being challenged, than on set SEM say, it was too hard. We did too much material. I'm telling you now, it is hard and we will be going through too much material. So if you're not happy with that, please, please, please think about your module choice. And if you still want to take the module, please, 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 at the end of the class, when you're filling in the set SEM, please don't say it was too hard and there was too much material. Because I've already told you that now, right? Okay? So you just have to put 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 for everything for me. That's the agreement. Okay. So what are we going to do on this module? I've sort of tried to emphasize that it's difficult, but what are we actually going to be doing? Well, we're going to be covering 3 things, and you can essentially think about this through 3 key words. We're going to be looking at theory, practice, and research. That's it. We're going to be looking at branding and marketing communications theories, ideas, models, frameworks, concepts that explain how branding and marketing communications works. We're going to be looking at practices. What do brands and marketing communicators actually do? And how do they relate to those theories? Are they based on theories? Are they based on some kind of ideas, some kind of model or framework that makes sense, that we agree with? Or, as sometimes people think, do brands and marketing communicators just make it up as they go along, without any thoughts about why they're doing what they're doing? And finally, we're going to think about research. Evaluating research, conducting research, reading research, and even starting to think about writing research ourselves, doing research in branding and marketing communications. And research is really the key point, because research is the bridge between theory and practice. I can have a theory, and I research it to see, does it work? And if it does work, hopefully, it can inform practice. Lots of things we're going to look at on this course look good in theory. Sometimes they look good in practice, but whether actually there's evidence to support them is the question. So that's what we're going to do. So, I mean, the way it's phrased here is going to describe the nature and scope of marketing communications practice and the marketing communications industry. One thing perhaps you didn't realise, and I didn't realise until not too long ago, is there's essentially 5 companies which make almost all of the adverts that you see every day. 5 companies, and they work in pretty much the same way. So we're going to understand those companies, how they work, how they do what they do. We're going to really look at their practice. We're going to be able to evaluate theoretical models developed in branding and marketing, communications research from a variety of academic disciplines. So we're going to look at psychology, we're going to look at sociology, we're going to look at media studies, cultural studies, philosophy, communications theory, a whole range of different academic disciplines which have contributed to knowledge about brands and marketing communications. And we're going to think about the ethical, social, and political issues involved in both the theories, the research, and the practice for branding and marketing communications. So one of the things you're going to see on this course is a number of you, particularly if you're interested in marketing, will come at brands and marketing communications interested to know what works. How can you create a successful brand? How can you persuade people with your advertising? But marketing communications and branding has effects, not just on individual consumers, but in cultures, in societies, in economies, which we also need to understand and consider to help make you reflective practitioners. Because there might be a technique that you can do, and it might convince people to change their behaviour, but it might not be something that you're actually very happy with in terms of its ethical, social, cultural, political consequences. Okay. Sorry. I have a smoothie every day. It's pretty disgusting, but I'll be drinking it. I can't drink it very quickly because it tastes horrible, so I apologise. So that's what we're going to do, right? Theory, practice, research. If you're not interested, as I'm sure some people aren't, in really understanding theory, this maybe isn't the module for you. If you're not that interested in understanding practice, this module maybe isn't for you. If you're not that interested in reading, potentially writing and conducting research, again, this module maybe isn't for you. But if you are interested in those three things, this module is for you. And one of our aims in this module is to really upskill you to a point where if you choose to conduct your dissertation in branding and marketing communications, you're going to have a massive step up on everybody else. Why? Because you're already going to know the theories, you're going to know how they relate to practice, and you're going to be able to conduct research in branding and marketing communications, specifically. Not marketing generally, not social science generally, but in branding and marketing communications specifically. Sounds good, doesn't it? So how's the module going to be taught? Well, each week we're going to have a class. The class will be 2 hours long. The class is going to involve me talking for quite a bit of it. So if you're not entertained, if you don't think that I'm somebody you want to listen to for an hour to an hour and 20 minutes every week, again, this module's maybe not for you, because that is what's going to happen. Unless you guys want to come and do the lecture, which is fine by me, if somebody wants to do it, but otherwise it will involve me going through materials relatively quickly. We're going to go through quite a lot of things, and what you'll see is my style of slides and lectures is I don't have lots of information on slides. I don't like lots of information on slides, and I can argue with you and win that argument as to why that is what you should do in terms of pedagogical theory. But I know lots of other people don't, and they have lots of writing and bullet points, and people like that. It's a terrible idea. We can have a separate argument over coffee about it, but trust me, I'm right. It's much better just to have visuals, so that's what I do. If you like slides with lots of information on, again, this isn't the course for you, because that's not going to happen. What you will see is I have slides with lots of pictures and videos, and I will talk to some of them. I won't necessarily talk to everything, because I try to use the slides to put lots of different ideas, and then in the lecture I sort of see what's relevant at the time and what you're interested in. So there might be some videos that I play, some that I don't play, and we'll just have to work with it. Does that sound okay? Yeah, good. So that's how the module's going to be taught. Then each week we're going to have an activity of some kind, which will involve group work, group discussions of you guys, and then some presentations. Now, this is a course in branding and marketing communications. We're going to be focusing on some specific marketing communications techniques, primarily advertising. But marketing communications is much more than that. Marketing communications is about the ability to stand up and present. So one of the things which we're looking to develop on this course is your communication skills more generally. Your ability, your willingness to stand up and present in front of people. Because guess what? That's a skill, and it's a skill which you can practice and get better at. It's a skill which you need to do. So what I don't want to have to do, but I will, but I really don't want to have to do, is to start picking on people and say, right, you present, because I think that's really horrible and unfair, and I hated that when I was a student. But if people aren't willing to say, yeah, I will present, then I will have to start picking on people, which I don't like doing. I know, you had Tassos, Dr. Pagliassis, teacher, I think, last semester. He quite likes doing that. I don't like doing it at all. But so it's much easier if somebody just puts their hand up and says, I'll have a go. So again, if you're not happy with that, and some people aren't, and I completely understand that. When I was a student, was very shy and nervous. I didn't like standing up and talking in front of people, and I would get out of it any way I could. If you don't want to do that, this isn't the module for you. Okay? So we've got classes. There's a Moodle page which has got not that much information on. We've tried to put all the information in slides. There's reading lists that we can talk about in a moment. We've got tasks, activities, and discussions within the classes. You guys doing presentations. I will be recording the lectures, although this lecture capture, I think, is only going to capture the slides, not me. I don't think there's a camera in this room. I've tried to figure it out. I can't, but I will try and do lecture capture, because I appreciate I can talk quite quickly. I can sometimes repeat things and end up making it really confusing for everybody, and it's just useful to have a resource to go back to. The lecture recordings, though, aren't supposed to replace coming to lectures. I totally understand sometimes people will be late. I'll definitely be late at some point on this course, but I'll try to be here as quickly as I can. And I understand sometimes people are ill. I might get ill at some point on this course. Like, you can't attend lectures, that's fine. But attendance is a key part of the course, because it's through attendance that you can participate in the group discussions. In the group discussions, you can check your knowledge, check that you actually understand something. You can talk to me, talk to your friends, you can present and get feedback. And all of those are really essential parts of what we're trying to do. What we also have in this class are 3 online lessons, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a second. I'll talk about them now. So this is the lecture syllabus. What we're going to do on this course is essentially well, we can think about it as 3 sections. In the first few weeks, we're going to be looking at theories. Theories of branding, theories of marketing communications. So we're going to look at psychological theories, sociological theories, cultural theories, and what we call macro theories, looking at media effects and so forth. We're going to then move on to start thinking about, lectures, practices, what people actually do. How do you create, in practice, actually create it, not in theory, but actually create effective marketing communications and brands? How does the industry work? What kind of considerations do people have to go through? So on and so forth. In between all of those, we have these 3 online study sessions, which is the first year we've done it, so hopefully it's going to work. In those 3 online study sessions, we're going to be focusing on research, specifically reading, analysing and conducting branding and marketing communications research. And the lessons are online so that you can do them at your own pace. We tried doing it in the class for the last couple of years and it didn't work very well. But what these online lessons ask you to do is to read a paper, and there's some videos with myself and Dr. Pediasis talking through the papers, trying to help you understand them, and then copy the research methods that they've done in the paper. So there's some test data sets, and you can just play around with them and go through them and try them as best you can. And again, we'll have some online resources to help you do those. With the idea being that by the end of the course, you'll have understood how to do basic quantitative research specific to branding and marketing communications, basic qualitative research specific to branding and marketing communications, and some more applied research, the type that you'll see going on in practice, in brands, and in the advertising industry. What's nice about these online sessions and why we like them is it gives you guys a little bit of flexibility, because the course is quite heavy on reading, the assignment's quite heavy on reading, and so it gives you a bit of an opportunity to have a bit of a break where you haven't got to come to a class like this, and you can work through those sessions at your own pace. Those sessions aren't going to be tested, and they're not specifically tested in the assessment for the course. So if you want to go back to them after the deadline for the assessment and do them then, that's fine, you can do that as well. So you have a little bit of flexibility. Does that make sense? Gone to silence. Well, I'll tell you what, I appreciate it's a big class. If it doesn't make sense and you want to send me an email or ask a question in the break, feel free to do that. Because you're all looking, some of you are looking slightly puzzled. We'll talk about it in a bit. The lectures are supported by a core reading, and this core reading is a book that I wrote. It's a book that I wrote out of this course. So I wrote it a couple of years ago, so it directly relates to a lot of the lecture content. In the meantime, since writing this book, actually we've innovated the course a little bit and added a couple of different sessions. So there's some sessions which aren't in the book, and I'll make some additional chapters available to you guys around those sessions. But I think this book is really useful in terms of supporting most of the theoretical lectures that we're going to look at. So I'd strongly recommend, if you want to buy a copy, that's fantastic. If you don't want to buy a copy, there are copies in the library. That's also fantastic. If you want to go and leave a 5-star review on Amazon or your web shop of choice, of course, that's also fantastic. On the Moodle page for the course, we've got quite a lot of, we try to keep the content separate, but there's guidance for doing the assessment. There's industry and practitioner news sources. There's sources around various social media and mixed media resources that you might want to look at, whether that's documentaries or interviews with interesting brands, interesting advertising agencies, whether that's job boards on industry websites. We tried to collect all of those together onto the Moodle page, as well as obviously having links to slides, readings, and so on and so forth. There's a reading list attached to the Moodle page, which you can access by clicking this little bit, reading list. And the reading list looks quite long, and it looks quite scary, and it has hundreds and hundreds of things in it. But, and there's a big but, you are not expected to read all of them at all. So let me explain a little bit about the reading list. We have the general textbook for the course, and then below that there are sections with a flag button. This is attitude. And these are readings related to attitude. The assessment for the course is a literature review in a topic. And the topics relate to the reading list topics. So if you're going to write your literature review around attitudes and advertising, we've collated a starting point reading list for you, about 10 papers, books, articles, and so on, which we think are really great places for you to start your research for your assignment. So the idea would be you would really probably look in depth at one of the sections on the reading list, not all of them. Okay. In terms of the assessment for this course is 100% coursework. There is no exam. And the task is to write a 3,000-word literature review on one of the topics that is available on Moodle. I think there's 14 topics that you can pick from. If you want to do a topic that's not on that list, you can come and see me, but I would strongly advise against doing that. Generally, the students that tried to do that don't really do a great job of it. But if you're really passionate about something, and you really know that's what you want to write your dissertation on, or you want to go and work in something related to something that's not on one of the reading lists, come and speak to me about it and we'll have a chat. But I think you'll find most topics are covered. The literature review is a challenge. It's very difficult to write an effective literature review because you have to read and synthesize a lot of materials. However, students that complete this task tend to do quite well. The average for the course is usually around 65, 66 marks. And I know a lot of students find this very useful in terms of translating it then into your dissertation. And I know in the past, critical marketing, I think you also have to write a literature review. But this is a literature review specific to an area of research. And many of you, I'm sure, will go on to do dissertation topics in branding and marketing communications. So you've already covered a lot of the literature that you might then want to pick up in your dissertation. That's why we've designed the assessment in this way. In terms of conducting the assessment, this is the marking rubric that we're going to use to evaluate your work. And we'll talk through this in some subsequent classes in much more detail. But essentially, we're looking for you to do a couple of things. We're looking for you to present your work how we ask you to present it. Now, some students again turn around and say, well, I don't want to do that. I want to present it how I want to present it. And I mean formatting it. Literally, we'll tell you which font to use. And if you don't use that font, that's fine, you just don't get marks for it. Why do we do that? Well, we do that because actually, this is a really key communication skill in branding and marketing communications. If you want to do and create your own advert and get it into a newspaper, guess what? There's one of 3 types of formats you have to submit it in, or they won't publish it. You can't say, well, I don't like that. You've got to do it that way. If you want to advertise on a website, there's one of about 5 formats you have to use. Otherwise, they won't do it. You can't say, well, I don't like it. I like to have things. No, tough luck. You have to do it the way they tell you. If you're working for a brand and you buy a 20-second advertising spot on TV, you've got 20 seconds. That's all you've got. You've not got 25 seconds. You have to pay more for that. You've got 20 seconds. And if you send something in that's 25, they won't play it. So when it comes to presentation, it's really key that you follow the style sheet, which is on Moodle, which tells you exactly how to format your paper. And that you're within the word count. Within the word count. You can be massively within the word count if you want to, or around 3,000 words. I'd recommend around 3,000 words. So presentation. We're going to assess your ability to review the literature. So have you just relied on the reading list that we've given you? It's good, it's not great. Have you gone past that reading list and started to do some independent research? Have you developed the ability to highlight what's the important research in your topic? That's really great if you can do that. That's what we're looking for you to do. And the final criteria is your argument. Have you been able to not just summarize the literature, but actually organize it, synthesize it into such a way that you're actually expressing some kind of an opinion about it? That's a really difficult task to do. So I've gone through all those. So that's the course. Has anybody got any questions about the module and how it's going to operate? No? Okay, great. So in that case, I'm going to suggest that we move on and start the substantive discussion in the lecture. Does that sound okay? Yeah? Shall I do a deal with you? If I ask a question, shall I frame it negatively so that then you can just be quiet? Like I say, be quiet if you're happy. Oh, but now you've not been quiet, so now I don't know what to... Anyway, one thing I also wanted to just point out is, this is obviously, it's a big room. I appreciate over the course of a 2-hour lecture, before we have a break, you might need to leave the room to go for a comfort break, I think it's called, or you get an important phone call. I've unlocked the door at the back, so if you do need to leave, could I ask that you go around the back rather than walking through the front? Just a small thing. Okay, so what we want to talk about now is some of the really big, high-level questions around communication. Branding and marketing communications is all about just that word, right? Communicating. Communicating value in your brand. Communicating some kind of meaning or differentiation to a brand. Communicating some kind of an offer or a promotion. Communicating something about the product and how it works, right? You'll have seen, hopefully, on your consumer behavior courses, there's a range of risks involved in consuming anything. Consumers are faced with really difficult choices. One of the functions of brands and marketing communications is to lower those risks, to show consumers how a product works, what benefits it might have for them. All of those outcomes rely on communication. If you want to tell a consumer that you've got a great new product, you have to tell them, you have to communicate. If you've got a product and you want to lower the price, you've got to tell people you've lowered the price. Otherwise it won't have any effect. All of branding and marketing communications is communication. Simple. So we often say brands create value. They create financial value for firms and organizations, and they create personal value, symbolic value, different types of values for consumers. The question is how? The answer to that is, well, they communicate it, right? Simple, they communicate. You tell people about your price. Well, what I want to do for this sort of next half an hour is unpick that simple assumption. Just telling people something is actually quite a difficult thing to do. And a lot of the models, the theories, the practices that we're going to cover on this course ultimately can relate back to one of two ideas about what communication is and how communication works. And sometimes some of the debates that we see in the literature in any given area are because there are two different views of how communication works. So it's actually nothing to do with differences in how you should do branding. It's a theoretical difference about what is communication. So here's just some ideas. Like, we're going to cover some of these in more depth on the course. Ross Reeves, really influential advertising agent, he said, a brand is a product's unique selling proposition. You probably talked about segmentation, targeting, positioning in marketing strategy or marketing management previously. The idea that you have to differentiate your offering from your competitors' offerings. Great. So how does the consumer know about your unique selling proposition unless you tell them? And is the telling a simple thing? You just have to say, this is what our brand is. Maybe. Jack Reese, again a really famous marketing strategist, said, a brand is a singular idea or concept that you, the brand, own inside the mind of a prospect or a customer. In other words, a brand is something that you put into the mind of a consumer. You take your unique selling proposition and you put it into the mind of the consumer. Okay. Makes sense. Seems so simple, doesn't it? So simple, why doesn't everybody do it? Why doesn't every brand work perfectly? Well, maybe things are a bit more complicated. How do you get something into the mind of the consumer? That is the question. David Ogilvy, a very famous advertising agent who started one of the biggest advertising agencies in the world to this day, said you do it, you communicate your brand through its name, packaging, price, its history, its reputation, and the way it's advertised. You get your idea into the consumer's head by picking a name, picking some packaging, selecting a price, behaving in a certain way, so you have a history and a reputation, and then choosing how to advertise, how to communicate all of those features, that history, that reputation to consumers. Again, this seems pretty simple, right? You get these inputs, these things, you pass them over to a consumer, you put them inside their head, and then you own that idea in the consumer's head. Sounds easy? This is the American Marketing Association. They say the way you get your idea into the consumer's head is you have a name, a term, a design, a symbol, or any other feature that will identify one seller's goods over another. And all you have to do is pick your name, pick your symbol, pick your logo, pick your colours, and you've got yourself a brand. Easy. We won't worry about those ones. Now, this idea that all you have to do is pick a name, pick a logo, pick a symbol, advertise some stuff, and you get your idea into the consumer's head. That is based on a very particular theory of communication. A theory of communication in the book I call a monologue. Does everyone know what a monologue is? So a monologue is just one person speaking. So this is a monologue. One person speaking. In a monologue, only one person is active, has an active role, the speaker. And the assumption is that whatever the speaker says is received and goes into the head of the listener. So if I just stand here for 2 hours, which I hopefully won't do, but one day I might, hopefully I won't, and just talk at you, and close the door, walk out of class, go, well, I've told them everything they need to know, they should know it. But now that is what this model of communication says. But intuitively, I'm sure many of you would think, at the end of those 2 hours, you'll be tired, you'll be bored, you'll want a coffee, you'll have been looking at your phone, you'll have checked your WeChat, and you will have missed things. Right? I will have said it, but you won't have listened, you won't have heard. This is a monologue, and this is one of the problems with a monologue. But you'll see this model of communication, and this sort of idea of you've got something at one side, and you transmit it over, you send it over to the other side. That structure is at the heart of lots and lots of branding and marketing communications theories. You can pick up almost any textbook in branding and marketing communications, and they'll have a model that looks like this in it. This is from my textbook, because my textbook proves to look like. You can look at almost any research paper in the Journal of Advertising or the Journal of Marketing, in the top journals, and they'll have a model that has a thing over here that goes to the consumer. Right? They'll have a brand value, an idea that goes over to the consumer. These are all based on a particular monologue view of communication. In technical terms, this is sometimes called the transmission model, because it focuses on transmitting meaning, taking an idea from one side and moving it to another. Okay, so let's just talk through this model. In abstract terms, you have an information source, a brand, which has some idea that it wants to communicate. So let's say we're a luxury brand. Right? We want to tell people we're a luxury brand. So we've got our message, we're a luxury brand. How do we get that into the head of the consumer? Well, we can tell them, but actually in telling them, we're going to have to pick a way to tell them. Do we do it with words? Do we do it with pictures? Do we do it with sounds? Do we do it with experiences? Do we do it with events? Do we do it on television, in a newspaper, a magazine, on social media? Right? We have to pick a way of transmitting. And that way of transmitting will shape how we can communicate our message. Let's say we pick a billboard. Everyone knows what a billboard is, right? Big flat screen with a picture on. So you have to have a picture. You don't have sound on a billboard. So you take your message, and then whichever media, how you choose to transmit it, will give you some kind of signal that will be different depending on the kinds of media or channels, transmission channel that you choose. If you want to use the web, you can start to have all kinds of cool, funky features. If you want to use a cinema, you can have movies, pictures, and people talking. If you choose the radio, you can have sound, but you can't have pictures. If you choose a magazine, you can have pictures, but you can't have sound. So just saying we are luxury, well, you can't say we are luxury on a billboard. You can write it, you can't say it. Does that make sense? Yeah. I think this is one where I start to keep talking about something and confuse myself. So you get a signal. The key point in this model is, which is where it starts to get complicated, a message and a signal are different. A message is an idea. A signal is a particular way of expressing that idea. There's lots of ways of expressing that idea. So once you've picked one, you send it over on that media channel. Once it gets printed in the newspaper or broadcast on the radio, or it appears on somebody's computer screen, they receive it. When they receive it, they see those images, they hear the words, they watch the video, and get the signal. They've got the signal, they haven't got the message. They have to decode it, they have to take the signal and figure out what is the message. This is trying to say that this is a luxury brand. That's why it's got that really attractive model in it. Then they get the message. This is transmission model. And what it starts to emphasize to us is that original idea of just saying, well, you just tell people your name. You just tell people what your brand stands for. Well, it starts to be a little bit more complicated, because now we've got, how do you get the message into a signal? How do you choose the best signal? And at the other end, once the signal has been received, how does the receiver unpack that signal and turn it back into the message? The technical name for those two processes is encoding and decoding. The information source, a brand, encodes its message, we are luxury, into an advert. The consumer, when they see that advert, has to decode the signal back into a message. And in each of those steps, there's room for error. So it's kind of interesting, I think, to think about where this came from. This model comes from the work of Claude Shannon, and I have a picture of him here, this guy. Claude Shannon was sort of like the Mark Zuckerberg of the 1940s. He was this tech genius. He was a mathematician. He was quite a nerd. He didn't do anything about branding or marketing communications. He had no interest in them whatsoever. What he did was he was working for a telephone company. Originally, telephones used to just have, you bought two telephones and they had a wire in between. And you couldn't call any other number, you could only call that one telephone. That was the original telephone system. And what happened when people in the early 20th century started to buy telephones was they started to put extra wires in so that now I can pick up my phone and I can call you, you, or you. And they started to build bigger and bigger systems. The problem was the wires would often get crossed. So I tried to call you, but I'd end up calling all three of you. Or I tried to call you, but I'd end up calling you and I'd be talking and I could hear both of you. So for telephone companies, they had this real problem. They wanted to figure out how to stop this. And this is how Shannon created this model. And the model is a way of testing whether a message that goes in at the start is the same as the message that comes out at the end. This is his formula, and it is literally, I've gone the wrong way. This model. That's it, right? All it says is, you have a message at the start, you transmit it. In transmitting it, you have a signal. That gets received, and then you should hopefully have a message at the end. And if there's a difference between that and that, there's a problem that the telephone company needs to go fix. That was it. Interestingly, it was nothing to do with the meaning of the message. They didn't care about what the message was, what the words were, what they were about. They just wanted to check, had the words gone to the other end? So they focused a lot on, noise. And noise, they found, is always introduced in any communications channel. Oh, goodness me. Here, in between transmitting and receiving, there'll always be some kind of noise. And a good example of this is, there's a children's game. In the UK, we call it Chinese whispers. I know in America, they call it telephone. You've probably played it, where I whisper a message to you, and you whisper the same thing to that person, and you whisper it to that person, and you whisper it to that person. And then at the end, we see what happened at the end of it. And it's always different, right? Okay. Well, you can think about that through this model. Why is it different? Because I've said something to you, you said it's noise gets introduced. Because of the whispering, you can't hear quite right. And so you say the wrong word, and then that word gets changed by somebody else, and then that word gets changed by somebody else, and then that word gets changed by somebody else. There have even been studies where people have literally drawn a line on a piece of paper and said to people, just copy that straight line. And what they find is after 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 people tracing over a straight line, the straight line starts to get all squiggly and messed up, and people draw circles, and people go wrong. This is noise that gets introduced. That process of just telling people about your brand is really complicated. You have the problem of encoding the message, you have the problem of decoding the message, and you have the problem of noise. It's just built into all human communication. It can go wrong very quickly. There's some more questionable theoretical ideas in this simple monologue transmission model of communication. One of them is, if we focus on encoding, the model relies on an understanding of communication, which is sometimes called the picture theory. The picture theory is a philosophical idea that we can represent a message, we can represent something about the world accurately, with no ambiguity, no misunderstandings. So this is the example that is always used to illustrate the picture theory. The fork is to the left of the knife to describe this picture. Now, why does it describe this picture? It describes the picture because the fork is to the left of the knife in the picture. Yeah? It makes sense to everyone? Yeah. So the fork is to the left of the knife in the sentence as well, because the fork comes first. So the sentence literally creates a picture of the world. The idea of picture theory is that you just have to pick the right code, the right signal, and there'll be no misunderstanding. We want to say our brand is luxury, we just say our brand is luxury, everybody goes, the brand is luxury. Perfect. There's no misunderstanding, no problem. Does that sound sensible to you? Sorry? Yeah, of course I can, right? Perfect. By the way, please, if you want me to explain something again or to try and give you a different illustration, just say. I'll try my best to help you understand. It's kind of difficult, though, the picture theory of language. But think about it. If you wanted to tell somebody you were unhappy, you could do lots of things, right? You could scream at them. You could shout at them. You could bring them, I'm really unhappy, and the opposite. So how do you capture your unhappiness? According to the picture theory of communication, picture theory of language, it is possible for you to pick either words or sounds or images which exactly communicate how cross you are, how angry you are. Right? So in this case, the fork is to the left of the knife. Exactly mirrors, creates a picture in words, this picture. So it's the idea that a brand or a communicator of any kind just has to pick the right codes. They just have to encode their message in the right way, and all of the problems of noise and misunderstandings will be solved. Okay. Now, there's some complications to this. One of the first ones is, the fork is to the left of the knife. If you don't speak English, this doesn't make sense to you, right? Meaning, the codes that people pick, the way that you change a message into a signal, is way more complicated than this picture theory says. Why is that? Well, there's some technical terms we can cover. One is that images, words, sounds, ideas have multiple different meanings. In every single language that I'm aware of, words have different meanings. Sometimes completely contradictory meanings. So the example I like to give here is, when you say I'm sorry to somebody, are you always sorry? No, never, right? You just want them to stop talking at you, you want them to stop crying or stop shouting at you. You're not actually sorry, but you say, oh, I'm sorry. Words, images, sounds have many different meanings. They don't just picture the world. They're not just an accurate representation. They mean different things to different people at different times. Okay. So an example of this this is a study of language done by an ethnographer. And what they found, they were observing a family having breakfast. And the parents said to the children, go and sit on the apple juice chair. Now, in terms of the picture theory of language, that would mean there was a chair that was made of apple juice. Now, that would not be a very good chair to sit on, because apple juice is liquid and it's not a chair. What the ethnographer realised was this family had a particular chair where the kids always had their apple juice, so they called it the apple juice chair. They created their own sign, their own code, their own way of talking about this chair. They called it the apple juice chair. That didn't make sense to anybody else. So the way you change a message into a signal, we can start to think, well, maybe it's a bit more complicated than that picture theory of language. Maybe there isn't just one way of doing it. Maybe it's not just noise that gets introduced to the system that makes people confused. Maybe it's because words, images, sounds, symbols, prices have lots of different meanings for different people in different contexts. I'll quickly talk about this. There was a study in the 1940s about this very issue, specific to advertising. A researcher called James Vickery, who we're going to talk about a little bit later on in the course, actually, he went and asked people, if I say advertising, what's the first thing that you think of? And what he found was people thought of a whole range of different things. Some people would say advertising, oh, they're liars. Right? Some people would say advertisers, oh, they tell us about products. Some people might work in advertising and say advertising is an essential part of markets. People had different understandings, different interpretations of that same word, depending on who they were, where they lived, who their friends were, what they did, so on and so forth. So you start to get to a point where, although this transmission model is a nice simple way of saying, just tell people about your brand, and then they know about it. When we actually start to pick it apart, we start to see how you encode your message. It's kind of complicated. You can't just say we are luxury, because we are luxury means different things to different people. How do you take a photo of we are luxury? It's kind of difficult to think how you might do that. You can get noise introduced into any system. And then on the other side, how people decode a message is open to all sorts of different interpretations. In the same way that people think advertising can mean different things, or I'm sorry can mean different things, price, anything a brand does, ish, can all be received differently. Whereas, for example, in a pretty famous study by some behavioural economists, they found that even numbers have completely different meanings to people, depending on how you code them, depending on how you communicate them. So in one study, they offered people two choices. They said, imagine that there's an outbreak of a killer disease on campus, and 600 people have been affected by this killer disease. You've got two choices. You can have treatment, which is definitely going to save 200 lives. 200 people will live and give everyone this treatment. Or you can choose a different treatment, but it means 400 people are definitely going to die. And what they found was most people preferred option A. It sounds nice. I don't want to kill 400 people. I'd like 200 people to live. Now you probably already start to realise it's the exact same option. They offer people similar statements expressed with some different numbers. The meaning of the numbers is the same, but the way it's expressed is different. So let's say there's a 66% chance everybody's going to die, or 33% chance everybody lives. What happens when you change the positive and negative framing of numbers is people completely change their interpretations of them. So in the first option, people would be really, really attracted to saving people. In the second option, people are really, really attracted to keeping everybody alive, even though the numbers go down. People don't always just like the bigger numbers. Think about it when you go onto a web page. for, say, Amazon. Do you use Amazon? Sure. And it will say a price, and then it says 33% off underneath. Well, the 33% off is meaningless to you because the price is the price. But the fact that it says 33%, they know will cause more people to buy it because they'll think they're getting a bargain. The numbers don't change. The way you frame numbers changes how people interpret them. Telling people this many people will live or this many people will die, even if the numbers are exactly the same, changes what people choose. Oops. Even when you give people what should be objective, factual information, like a number, people will decode it differently. People take that signal and change the message. So, if we're not happy with this monologue view, if there are problems with this monologue transmission view of communication, how else can we account for branding and marketing communications? How else might it work? This is just some funny brand names that people have picked where they haven't understood context. So you get like a veggie poo, for example, is a product somewhere. Anyway. Another way of thinking about communication is not as a monologue, not as something which one person, a sender, a brand, does to listeners or consumers, but it's to start thinking about it more as a dialogue. So something that takes place between two active participants. Between two active participants. And this is based on a very different understanding of how communication works. Right? Now, instead of just having an arrow from a sender to a receiver, the arrow goes two ways. The receiver has to do something as well. We can take this to its extreme, and this is can be quite difficult to get your head around, so I'll try to spend a few minutes talking this through. At the extreme of this dialogical view is what's called social constructionism. And the idea behind social constructionism is people don't just pick words and images and sounds. They actually, between senders and receivers, construct everything. They construct all of the words and codes that they use. So let me give you an example to try to illustrate this. It's kind of difficult to get your head around on a Wednesday morning. What's this picture of? A mountain, right? Okay, perfect. So we can all look at this and we can say, that's a mountain. Yeah? Where does the mountain start and where does the mountain end? Is that where the mountain starts? No. Is that where the mountain starts? Is it there? Is it there? It's difficult to know, and we can't all agree. We can say it's a mountain, but we don't know where the mountain is and where it isn't. Here the idea then is not that we have a world and we reflect it in language. The idea is the opposite. We have language and then we create the world out of it. We can all look at that and say it's a mountain. Once we call it a mountain, we go, that's sort of where the mountain is. We don't know where it starts, where it stops, but we can call it a mountain, so we can say, do you want to go and walk up this mountain and you know what we're talking about? And that's happened through the very process of calling it a mountain. I told you it's kind of confusing. Right? What if instead of calling it a mountain, we start to talk about it in terms of physics, chemistry, molecules? We'll be talking about a different thing. We'll be constructing it in a different way. A good branding example of this was a paper published a few years ago in the Journal of Consumer Research, where researchers went and looked at white space in adverts. Like, you've probably seen like the Apple adverts where there's just a load of white space, nothing in it. Now, on a transmission model, white space should have no meaning. It's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. But what these researchers found was actually consumers thought white space had a very important meaning. one of the first things that they found consumers thought was, if a brand has lots of white space on its adverts, it tends to be a luxury brand. They don't have to say, we are luxury. In fact, they can literally just have nothing, and that shows they're a luxury brand. So the consumers constructed the meaning of white space. They created it. And actually in the paper, what they do is they go back to think about, culturally, how is it that white space can come to represent luxury? Was it the fact that luxury brands started to use white space? Or did luxury brands use white space because they knew that it represented luxury? And they trace a really complex, and I thought quite interesting, history of graphic design and art and fashion, and show how blank white space starts to have a meaning, and then brands start to use it, and then consumers start to like it, and so brands use it more, and it starts to eventually become really, really powerful. To the point where white space, they find, is one of the best ways to communicate luxury. So what does it show? It shows this process of social construction. People creating meaning. Not by being told something, but by interpreting it a certain way, and then the sender changing what they say based on that interpretation. And it becomes a circular process out of which meaning emerges. Oops, there it is. This has been really influential in some more modern and more European views of branding and marketing communications. I really love this model. It's really cool. This is called the cyclical model of brands. It was developed by a researcher out of the University of Birmingham called Leslie De Shernatoni. And De Shernatoni did two things in some research. He reviewed academic articles and textbooks to see what were their definitions of brands. And out of that, he found there was about 13 different meanings of the word brand in academic textbooks. Some people would write about brands and say a brand is created by a marketer when they pick a name, packaging, price, history, reputation, and advertise their product in a certain way. Others would say a brand is the unique selling proposition that's created through a segmentation, targeting, and positioning approach and a differentiation strategy. So some really focused on what marketers did. Then some others focused very much on what consumers did. They would say a brand is something that a consumer constructs in their mind when they see an advert and they see white space, and they think that white space means luxury. So there's 13 different meanings, but you can kind of separate them and say some focus on marketers and are based on transmission, the marketer sending meaning. The others are based on consumers and are much more about consumers constructing or co-constructing, socially constructing meaning. De Shernatoni then went and interviewed a whole series of brand consultants. And what he found was that successful branding practitioners and branding consultants would switch between these different meanings of brands all the time. So De Shernatoni said, well, maybe it's not the case that one view's right and one view's wrong. Maybe a brand is all of those things put together. Maybe a brand is what marketers say, our brand is luxury. Maybe a brand is also then how consumers interpret what marketers say, and how marketers then change their brand based on consumers' interpretations. So you start to get this circular motion. It's no longer about transmitting from the marketer, from the brand, to the consumer. Now you start to get this circular motion, right? This co-construction of a brand over time, which starts to explain why brands can't just create themselves out of thin air. You can't just say, we are luxury, and become a luxury brand. It takes a very long time to transmit your message so you get enough consumers listening, then get enough consumers starting to understand and appreciate and interpret your messages the right way. and then changing the brand in this circular motion. As evidence for the length of time that it takes, you can just look at the list of top brands in any market. Globally, the list of top brands, the most valuable brands, are ones that have been created over hundreds of years. There's a few that are more recent, like Apple is more recent, but fashion brands like Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Chanel, hundreds of years old. Food brands like Coca-Cola, Cadbury's, and Kellogg's, hundreds of years old. Car brands, Ferrari, Ford, hundreds of years old, right? Because this process takes a long time to construct and listen to and respond to and change your marketing communications based on what consumers believe, how they change the meaning of things over time. So white space didn't always mean luxury, but as it came to mean luxury, good luxury brands started to use more white space that made it mean luxury even more. Does that make sense? A little bit? Hopefully. Okay, so we start to move on then from these two ideas, right? One, a monologue, the idea that brands just tell consumers something and consumers either get it right or they get it wrong. To a dialogical view, which sees consumers being just as active, and that good brands don't just tell people things, they listen to them as well. Okay. Keep these two models in mind, these two ideas in mind, whenever you're reading research or looking at the lecture, whenever we're covering different theories, and think, is this a monologue theory or is this a dialogue theory? Because what you'll find, as I said like half an hour ago, is that in some academic debates, ultimately it boils down to some people think in terms of monologues, some people think in terms of dialogues, and they won't necessarily say that. But it will be their implicit assumption in their model or their research or their practice. So like the AMA, which is the American Marketing Association definition of a brand, that is based on a monologue. You compare that to many brand consultants that will focus on consumers, it's based on a dialogue. It's a fundamentally different theory or model or idea of how brands communicate value. It's the big question at the heart of a lot of debates. Now, the way forward that I sort of want to argue for, I suppose, is to think about branding and marketing communications as persuasion, not just communication. So what's persuasion? Persuasion is the attempt to change what people think and what people do. In the book, the core textbook for the course, I define advertising as attempts to change what people think and what people do. What people think, how much value they give to a brand. What people do, are they actually going to buy that brand? Now, you might intuitively come in here thinking, well, all marketing communications, all branding is about getting people to buy products. That's not true. A lot is about getting people to think different things. To change how they think about a market, to change how they think about a particular product offering. I won't play this video, it's quite a long video, but this guy, his name is Bill Bernbach. He is one of the most important people we'll cover on the course. One of the most important thinkers in advertising and branding of the last 100 years. He says, the truth isn't the truth until people listen to you. And people won't listen to you unless you're interested. And you won't be interested unless you get people's attention. And you won't get people's attention unless you've got something they want to hear. It's kind of confusing, right? You've got to have something people want to listen to for them to listen to you, but you want to try to tell them something that you want to tell them. What's his point? His point is, it's not just about transmitting a message. You have to frame that message in such a way that it makes people interested in it. And this, he said, is the real skill of a brand or a marketing communicator or an advertiser. He said you can do marketing research and they'll tell you consumers want X. Guess what? What most people want is high quality for low price. But he said that's not You can't just say we're high quality and low price. No one's going to listen to that. You have to find a way of framing your message to get people's attention, to motivate them, to make them interested and inspired by what you're saying. Even if it's a product offer about we've changed the price of something, you have to do it in a way that gets people's attention and that will motivate them and inspire them. And he said the best way to do that, the best training, is to think about persuasion. And he said you should go back and read, which I don't expect you to do, you should go back and read this book by a Greek philosopher called Aristotle. He said Aristotle was the greatest salesman in the world. A Greek philosopher from like the 3rd century BC or something, right? From thousands of years ago. So let's take Bill Byrne seriously for a minute and think, well, what did Aristotle have to say? Aristotle said, if you want to persuade anybody of anything, if you want to change what people think or get them to do something, you have to do 3 things. You have to create what is called ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos is you have to create a sense of belonging. You have to get people to listen to you. You have to show them that you're important and somebody that knows what they're talking about, somebody that understands them and their needs. You have to speak their language. You have to get people interested. One of the main ways you do that is right at the start telling them who you are and why you're important, and why they should listen to you. That's ethos, creating a sense of belonging so that people listen to you. Then you have to have logos. What's your key argument? One of the things you'll see in the assignments when you get your feedback is, we'll say a lot of people don't really have an argument. You've described stuff, but you haven't given us an argument, you've not made us interested in it. So you have to have a key message, a key takeaway that you want somebody to know from your message. It's logos. And then finally, pathos is the use of emotion. Changing how you present the key argument to make it emotionally engaging with consumers. So think back to the behavioural economics experiment. Instead of saying people die, you want to say people live. Because that's nicer. It makes people feel good. Okay? So how do you do that? Well, there's a whole range of techniques Aristotle talks through in his book. He says you can introduce things in a certain way. And you can start to, of course, narrate or tell a story. You can create divisions. You say, some people think this, other people think that, and here's the answer. Some people think in a monologue, some people think in a dialogue, but guess what? The answer is being persuasive. You create a division that has a natural endpoint where you want. You offer proof, you give illustrations, you give examples, you give research, you give statistics. You take on board any counter-claims that people might have. It's called refutation. You say, well, some people might say this is wrong, but actually it's not wrong. And then you can have some kind of strong conclusion. You'll see lots of these techniques are things we'll ask you to do in assignments, in presentations. This is the basic skills. And we see them all the time in branding and marketing communications. Let me give you an example. This is Steve Jobs launching the iPhone in 2007. You actually have the script on the task sheet in front of you if you'd like to read along.
Day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years.
All right, so he walks on to the stage and says, today is a day that I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. What's he doing already? He's saying, I've got something important to say. I've been waiting for 2.5 years to tell you this. That's ethos. It's getting people interested in what you've got to say.
Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything.
he's starting to narrate what's happening. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. So he's told you he's been waiting for 2.5 years to tell you about something. What's he going to tell you about? A revolutionary new product. That's it.
And Apple has been, well, first of all, one's very fortunate if you get to work on just one of these in your career. Apple's been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. In 1984, we introduced the Macintosh. It didn't just change Apple, it changed the whole computer industry.
Right, so now he's saying he's already created a revolutionary product in the past. Okay? Ethos. He knows what a revolutionary product is. Why? Because they changed the whole computing industry already.
In 2001, we introduced the first iPod. And it didn't just change the way we all listen to music. It changed the entire music industry.
Right, so what's he showing you now? He's giving you lots of evidence, lots of proof that he really knows what a revolutionary product is, because he's not only changed computing, he's changed the entire music industry.
Well, today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things.
Right now, see what he does in a second. Okay, so he's established ethos. He said, I've been waiting 2.5 years to tell you about something. Oh, and by the way, we've got a history of producing breakthrough revolutionary products. So he hasn't had to say, I'm going to tell you about a breakthrough revolutionary product. You've already done that yourself. You've told yourself that, right? And see what he does here. He's got 3 things, and he's going to get the audience to tell him the next thing.
A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it?
Are you getting it? Let's see what he's going to talk about.
These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device.
So here's my question to you, and you don't have to answer it. It's a rhetorical question, right? Why did he say there's 3 things? Why didn't he just come out and say we're launching one thing? It's an iPhone. It would be the same message, yeah? Yeah, right? Think about it in terms of ethos, logos, pathos. Ethos is all about having a breakthrough device. And now, the pathos is it's not just one thing, it's not 2 things, it's 3 things. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but all together. So he's made that product seem 3 times as good. Right? He's no longer talking about one revolutionary device, he's talking about 3 revolutionary devices in one product. But you see how he could have just come out and said, "Hi everybody, I'm here today to launch the new iPhone." But that would not have got people's attention, ethos. It wouldn't have got them cheering and whooping, pathos. And it wouldn't have got his key argument, which is, this is a revolutionary product.
And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
That's the logos, right? Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. That's the message. He could have just come out and said, today Apple is going to reinvent the phone. But he spent 3 minutes demonstrating rhetoric. Ethos, pathos, logos. He didn't just come out and say, we're going to reinvent the phone, here's an iPhone. He came out and said, I've been waiting for 2.5 years to tell everybody about this. Think of all the great revolutionary products that we've created in the past. And now let's think about this new revolutionary product. And what do I want you to think about? I want you to think that it's 3 products in one.
And here it is. No. Actually, here it is, but we're going to leave it there for now. So, before we get into it, let me talk about a category of things. The most advanced phones are called smartphones, so they say. And they typically combine a phone plus some email capability, plus they say it's the internet, sort of the baby internet, in the one device, and they all have these plastic little keyboards on them.
So now he's creating a division, right? He's saying there are these things called smartphones, have plastic little keyboards, and they do some stuff. And he's going to tell you now how his product is different from them. He's creating a division.
And the problem is that they're not so smart, and they're not so easy to use. So if you kind of make a Business School 101 graph of the smart axis and the easy to use axis, phones, regular cell phones are kind of right there. They're not so smart, and they're not so easy to use. But smartphones are definitely a little smarter, but they actually are harder to use. They're really complicated. Just for the basic stuff, people have a hard time figuring out how to use them. Well, we don't want to do either one of these things. Well,
now, even before he's told you, where do you think his product's going to be? Do you think it's going to be down here?
No.
Do you think it's going to be down here? No. Up here? Down here?
No.
It's going to be up here, right? Yeah. No matter what this graph was, it was always going to be at the top and to the right. Now, anthropologists and psychologists say, a bit like people think white space is a denotation of luxury, you always have the good things up here. That's where people look, it's up, it's like a picture theory of language, it's on top of everything, it's above everything, it's higher quality. This market map makes perfect sense, right? You've got smartphones that aren't very smart, smartphones that are really difficult to use. And it creates a natural home for his product, his revolutionary breakthrough product. What he's done here is he's narrated and divided the market up in such a way, here's not the only option, right? Here's where the clever people are. Here's where the losers are. Right? Now, he's picked the axis. He's picked the axis. Why has he picked those axes? It goes back to what you said before, to emphasize his product. They put his product on top. He's not mentioning price. Right? If you put price, all of a sudden the iPhone at the time, cell phones and smartphones would have been like $100, $200. The iPhone retail price was about $1,000 when it was launched, right? It would go all the way over here. He's telling a story in a way that creates ethos, logos, pathos.
What we want to do is make a leapfrog product that is way smarter than any mobile device has ever been.
Just see how he uses these terms. A leapfrog product that jumps over everything. That is way smarter even than smartphones. Every single word that he's picking here is designed to hammer home his key argument, his logos. It's a breakthrough product. It's a leapfrog product. It's a product which has the whole of this side all to itself. It's unlike any other product, right? Every single term is hammering home that central argument.
And super easy to use. This is what iPhone is. Okay? So, we're going to reinvent the phone.
Right, I'm going to stop it there because we're going to be running out of time soon. But can you just see how even in this short clip, what have we looked at? 4 minutes 40. Steve Jobs has launched the iPhone using classic rhetoric. Ethos, logos, pathos. Egos, getting people to listen to you. I've been waiting 2.5 years to talk to you. Logos, we're going to reinvent the phone. Pathos, this is a leapfrog product. It's 3 revolutionary things in one. So recently, researchers have taken this idea of branding being not just about communicating, but about being about rhetoric on board. And there's been a whole host of research trying to understand not rhetoric in terms of ancient Greece, but branding and marketing communications rhetoric. I'll just take a few seconds to talk through some of it. Sorry, my mum was just calling me on the phone. Sorry. So, one stream of marketing and communications research does what's called content analysis. Has everybody heard of content analysis? It's okay if not. We'll talk about it quite a bit on this course. In content analysis, people will get together hundreds, thousands of adverts and analyse them to see what's the content of them. And this is one study where they looked at the presence of ethos, pathos, and logos over time. So they went back, it was an American study, and they looked all the way back to the 1900s at adverts. And they traced every decade how much do advertisers rely on ethos, logos, and pathos. How much do they present information about the product, logos, emotional motivations for consumers, pathos, and how much do they talk about their quality as a brand or a manufacturer, ethos. And what they found is that over time there's been a big increase in the amount of emotion that is expressed, the amount of pathos that brands and marketing communicators use. Big increase. Pretty much ethos has stayed about the same, and there's been a slight decrease in logos. What does that tell us? It tells us that as a type of rhetoric, branding and marketing communications is much more about emotion than facts. It's much more about feelings than information. If you think back to the monologue and dialogue models of communication, this also tells us something, because it's very difficult to communicate an emotion. You can't tell people, feel happy, and it makes them feel happy. You have to have a dialogue with them in which you make somebody happy. So researchers have taken this on board not just to think about the presence of different rhetoric, but also the types of branding-specific rhetoric that there is. When it comes to branding and marketing communications, what specific types of rhetoric are there? And they've tended to focus on the use of visual and verbal rhetoric. So verbal rhetoric being words, visual rhetoric being pictures. And what they argued, what they found, is that visually presented ideas tend to be more effective than verbally presented ideas. And this kind of makes sense, right? If you just had a big sheet of 30 pages to read, it's kind of difficult. But if you had a nice video to watch, it's more engaging. So how does this rhetoric work? In branding and marketing communications, they've found that there's two approaches. Instead of relying on things like introductions and narration and division like Steve Jobs did, in advertising, they tend to rely on what are called schemes or schema. Schemes is what I pronounce it, which is excessive regularity. So relying on patterns and expectations in language and visuals. Patterns. So a great example is alliteration. Alliteration is where you use a word which has the same letter at the start every time. So big, beefy, blitz. But. That pattern, but, makes it more memorable. Why that is, we're not going to go into that this week, we'll look at it next week. That's a psychological question. Why it is, for whatever reason, having that pattern, that regularity, that scheme, as a rhetorical style makes a message more memorable. Having the pictures organised in a pattern, so here they're in a sort of V shape, that makes sense when you see it. That is a scheme, a pattern. Makes sense and makes it more easy to understand, more easy to decode the message, and more effective as a message. This is what brand rhetoric research tells us. Make sense? Cool. The alternative way is to use a trope. And a trope is the opposite of a scheme. Instead of using a pattern or an expectation, a trope tries to break a pattern or an expectation. So in this example, if you saw rock burn, most English speakers would think the next word would be roll. Rock and roll. But this says rock and fries. That is a trope. It's taken an expectation and changed it. And again, we're not going to worry about the psychology of it at the moment, but brand rhetoricians, so that's totally wrong, people that study brand rhetoric find that when brands use a visual or verbal trope, they use language or images in a way that challenges people, that is unexpected, that shocks them, it's highly effective at expressing a message. So just some names. I don't want to go into this in detail. We've won McQuicken, McCrory, and Nick, a big research here, and they've tried to find out, well, what is it that this style of rhetoric does? What is it that schemes do, and what is it that tropes do? And generally what they've argued is schemes play off people's inbuilt knowledge. So you don't have to say something. So when Steve Jobs says, this is a phone, an internet communicator, and a revolutionary, I can't remember the other one, those three things, he doesn't have to say it's all one thing. Because it's a scheme. 1, 2, 3. It's these three things, and everybody's then expecting he's going to say it's actually one thing. So he doesn't have to say it himself. So when he stands up and says, we've been fortunate to launch a revolutionary device in computing and a revolutionary device in entertainment, and today we're going to talk about what? A revolutionary device. Right? That's a scheme, playing on patterns. One of the big patterns that he plays on, and lots of rhetoricians play on, it's called the rule of 3. You have 1, 2, and then you don't have to say the third thing. We've reinvented computers, we've reinvented music, now we're going to reinvent something else. Doesn't matter what. The rule of 3, that's the scheme. So it plays on people's inbuilt expectations, so that they fill in the gaps themselves. They persuade themselves. A trope does the opposite. It still plays off people's inbuilt expectations, But rather than letting them fill in the gaps, it challenges them. Their expectation might be that this is going to say rock and roll, so when it doesn't say rock and roll, it gets their attention. Does that make sense? Well, let's go with it. This is the silent bit where I think it makes sense. So this is really specific rhetorical styles for branding and marketing communications. Aristotle's ideas, it turns out, are really influential in politics, in all manner of areas of life. But the idea that branding and marketing communications is not just a monologue, and it's not just a dialogue, but it's a really specific type of dialogue. Persuasion, which uses tropes, which uses schema, is where brand rhetoric research is. Equally, not just looking at trends in terms of ethos, logos, and pathos, Macquarie and Nick have done content analyses of advertising over time, and they've seen similar kind of interesting trends where brands tended to communicate more with schema, and now they tend to communicate more with tropes. They tend to try to be more challenging, more shocking, and to undermine consumers' expectations more and more. Now, at this stage, we're not going to really go into why that might be the case, but one thing we can probably assume is if brands are doing it, it's probably because they think it works. Probably because they think tropes work. So, won't go into too much more depth on that. What I want to do, we've got 20 minutes left, is I just wanted to quickly talk about this because I would like to have a rule, which I had in the past every other year, but then it turned out on the radio when I came to work that it's quite a controversial rule, which I didn't realise would be a controversial rule. What I tried to say is, in this classroom, if people could speak English, that would be really great. But, and I've said that every year, but then when I came into work this morning on the car radio, it said at Duke University, some professor had said people have to speak English, and it had become a big controversy. I didn't think it would be. So that's made me kind of question whether I should say everyone has to speak English in the classroom or not. So I think what I'm going to do, because I don't want to be offensive to anybody, that's not my intention, is when you're presenting, people have to speak English, but if you want to speak any other language, you can do. I only speak English though, and I know I'm thick, and I wish I could speak more languages, but I can't. So if you've got any questions and things, you'll have to talk to me in English. But if you want to talk to yourselves in whichever language you're comfortable with, then, you know, I'm not going to force you to not do it. I'd recommend that you probably come to the UK to speak and improve your English, so you might want to do that, but I'm not going to enforce it, okay? So please don't, make me a social media villain, because apparently this academic at Duke University got sacked over doing it. I've done it every year. I've always said it, and I never thought it was a problem. Would you find that offensive, or would you not care? No. I don't get it. But anyway, so the first task is a short task, and let me apologise because I've talked for longer than I wanted to today. So we'll have just 10 minutes for the task. What you're asked to do in this task is, in pairs or threes, you have to pick one of you, and the other person has to sell that person to the rest of the class, using some rhetorical skills. So you just need to find out something interesting about the person you're talking to, and then somebody's going to have to stand up and try to sell your classmate to the rest of the class, to tell us why they're really interesting. Okay, so a bit like Steve Jobs launching the iPhone, you're going to have to launch your classmate. If you want to sell yourself, you're more than welcome to also sell yourself if you don't want to work with somebody. So you've got 10 minutes, and then I'm going to ask for some volunteers to stand up and show some rhetorical skills. Okay? Okay, guys, think about getting your short presentations ready, please. You've just got a couple more minutes. Okay, guys, so does anybody want to volunteer, or do I need to pick on somebody? Okay, then I'll have to pick on somebody. Sorry, guys. So I'm going to go for the boy in the back in an orange coat who's not looking at me. Yeah, you. Okay. Yes. Go for it. You've got a minute. Before you start, a little rule. Sitting at the back doesn't mean that you won't get picked on. Okay, well, you sell her or sell yourself. Sorry? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm not wanting to buy you. So we'll go for somebody else. We'll pick on a girl now to even it up. And we'll go girl in the New York hat. You. Yeah, you. So please either sell yourself or sell your classmate. Okay. Okay. Well, let's work with this. So, your sales pitch is you're a girl and you're 166 centimeters tall. Is that right? Okay, you sit down. So, we had a boy whose sales pitch was he's doing branding and marketing communications. And a girl who is 166 centimeters tall. So, as examples of rhetoric that's meant to make people interested, passionate, and motivated, are they good or bad? Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, because what you have just demonstrated is a scheme. Let me explain to you all, right? So, we have a girl with height. We have a boy with height. Right? So that now is our scheme, right? But my question to you is it a good scheme? The people that didn't present, do any of you wanting to buy these two brands? I don't want to. Because why do I care if you're 180 centimeters tall? Why would that motivate me to be interested in you? You don't need to answer that question, but why would it, right? It wouldn't. Because think about what's rhetoric about. It's about getting people's attention. It's about building a sense of belonging. Steve Jobs didn't stand up and say, we've got a new phone and it's white, or it's 3 centimeters, 3 inches long. That's not going to get people's attention. That's not going to be a persuasive argument, right? What you could do is certainly play on schemes and tropes, and thank you for the trope. What you've both done, though, is focus on which element? Ethos, logos, and pathos. Which element? Ethos is about building a sense of belonging, getting people to listen to you. Logos is about information, and pathos is about emotions. Yeah, right? This is just all information. This is logos. Right? Just telling people about a product, information about it, is kind of useful, but it's just one element of rhetoric. Right? And you could use schemes and tropes to try to build ethos and pathos to make people care that you're 166 centimetres or 180 centimetres. For example, let me give you, are you 180? Was that what you said? 180 centimetres? Yeah, okay. Right, so let me give you an example. Imagine a situation. You're reaching to get your last cookie from the top shelf. Just a minute. And you can't quite get it. The shelf is 178 centimetres. What you need is a man, a boy, who is 180 centimetres. Right? What's happened? You've taken the information and started to narrate it. You've started to give some kind of pathos to it. Let's take it even further. Let's say you're on a date. Your girlfriend or boyfriend wants the last cookie and you can't quite reach it. Wouldn't it be useful to have a friend who is 180 centimetres who can take that cookie and give it to the love of your life? Now you start to get pathos, you start to get emotion. So even when you're presenting information, logos, you can start to use rhetoric to do so. Okay? So, I apologise, this class has gone on a bit longer than I wanted it to. I've talked for longer than I want to. I'm sorry. Thank you very much to the people that contributed. Just to quickly go over what we've done today, we've had a brief look at brand theory, we've looked at communication theory, and we've looked a lot at rhetoric and persuasive theory. Next week, we're going to start really looking into some higher level psychological theories, which will help us to explain how why things work. If you've got any questions, please send me an email. There's some module outlines at the front and the back if you'd like a hard copy of them. Thanks a lot.
Robert, when the professors are presenting this weekend, speak Chinese the thing.
Yeah.
Actually, to present the people that talk English loudly in the public
Yeah, no, I
area.
saw it in one building.
Not
So.
in the class. Not in
Yeah,
the class.
yeah. But I thought it was an interesting thing to debate. Thank you.